Have you ever felt like a thread still exists between you and someone, even though everything between you has already moved into the past? No more late-night conversations, no more clear signs to hold on to, just a feeling, subtle, but real. Every now and then, in the middle of an ordinary day, you suddenly think of them, and you wonder, somewhere out there, have they ever thought of you the same way? The connection between two people doesn't always disappear just because the story ends. Some bonds seem to linger quietly in memory, in the lessons learned, in the ways we changed after crossing paths. This video isn't about getting back together. It isn't here to predict what happens next. It's simply an invitation to reflect on a possibility, that the impact you left in someone's heart may run deeper than you ever realized. And if you've ever sensed a presence still hanging in the space between you, stay with me. Because maybe it all begins with the way you once touched their life. Aquarius, have you ever walked away from a relationship and still felt like something remained? No more late-night conversations. No more waiting for that last message before sleep. No clear reason to say each other's name in everyday stories. On the surface, everything may have changed. Life moves on, new rhythms form, and yet, at a deeper level, it can feel like a thin thread still stretches between two souls, an invisible presence, not something you can see, but something you can feel, sometimes very clearly. You might be driving alone down a familiar road. An old song suddenly starts playing, and for a brief moment, their image appears, not because you were trying to remember, just that memory chose the right moment to visit. Real connections don't always depend on whether two people still talk. They're recorded in how we changed after meeting someone, in the new perspectives we gained, in the way our hearts matured, even just a little. Aquarius carries a very distinct energy. You don't love in predictable ways. You connect through intellect, through vision, through a kind of understanding you don't always fully reveal. So when you enter someone's life, you leave a mark in a way that's hard to describe, not through drama, but through depth. You make people think differently, feel differently, see themselves in a new light. And when someone has been touched at that level, forgetting you completely may not be as simple as they imagine. This isn't here to make you wait. And it's not here to create hope. It's simply something to reflect on, that meaningful connections often leave echoes in their own quiet way. Maybe they still think of you on a calm afternoon. Maybe they compare a new conversation to the ones they once had with you. Maybe they've wondered whether they truly understood you enough. Those thoughts don't have to lead to action. They don't require a message. They don't require a reunion. Sometimes the value of a connection lies in the fact that it existed at all, and that it changed both people. Aquarius, you are the sign of vision and collective awareness. You love with freedom, yet you bond with deep sincerity. So, if you've ever felt that thread still hanging between you and someone, you can see it as proof that your heart once opened fully. Not every story needs a clear ending. Yet some stories exist to remind us of our own capacity to connect. You don't have to control that. You don't have to prove your worth by being remembered. Just know this. When you live true to your nature, thinking independently, loving with respect, walking your path with conviction, you leave an imprint. And somewhere in this wide world, there may be someone who once crossed your path and still smiles from time to time when they think about what you shared, not because they want to return, but because they recognize that certain people enter our lives to teach us something essential about love, about freedom, about ourselves. If you were once part of someone's growth, that is already something beautiful. And if that thread still vibrates softly in memory, let it remain there, like a completed chapter that still gives off a gentle light whenever it's remembered. Because more important than anything else is how you choose to move forward from here. You don't enter someone's life like a storm. You arrive more like a quiet current of air, carrying new ideas, a different perspective that makes them pause and wonder, have I been seeing everything too narrowly all this time? You don't need to talk endlessly about yourself. You don't need to prove that you're special. Your uniqueness shows up in the way you listen, in the way you ask a question that seems gentle, yet somehow reaches the deepest layer of someone's thoughts, in the way you see potential in them, even when they're still doubting themselves. There are people who, standing beside you, they feel truly understood for the first time in their lives, not reduced, not reshaped into a more acceptable version. You give them space to be who they really are, and that is rarer than most people realize. When you walk away on the surface, everything may continue as usual. Their life doesn't stop. New relationships may begin, but the space you leave behind isn't the space of habit. It's the space of depth, of conversations that went beyond the surface, of being seen clearly and still respected. They may find joy elsewhere. They may find care elsewhere. But recreating the exact feeling of being with you, that's not so easy. You love with awareness. You commit when there is real resonance. And once that resonance has been shared, it carries its own frequency, one that cannot be copied. They may not remember every detail of the conversations you had, but they remember how inspired they felt. They remember their thinking expanding. They remember feeling encouraged to live more honestly as themselves. That kind of imprint doesn't fade easily. This isn't about placing you above anyone else. It's simply a reminder that the energy you carry is distinct. You weren't born to be a replacement in someone else's story, and you don't have to shrink yourself to fit into a space that no longer fits you. When you leave, it isn't disappearance, it's movement. You step away from places that no longer resonate with your frequency, and you leave behind a lesson. That true connection begins with honesty to oneself. At some point, they may look back and realize that what they had with you wasn't just a relationship. It was an experience that helped them understand themselves more deeply. And if that's true, then your value doesn't depend on whether you stayed or not. It lives in the imprint you left simply by being present. You don't have to compete to be remembered. Just continue living in alignment with your independent, compassionate, and thoughtful nature. Because when someone has once been touched by that kind of energy, they may move forward. But the feeling of being understood in that way is not easily repeated. And this may be the most important pause in this entire journey. When you feel a thread still vibrating somewhere between you, it doesn't automatically mean the two of you are meant to return to the same place. A connection that still lives in memory is not the same as a door that needs to be reopened. Some relationships are like seasons. They arrive, carrying lessons, carrying change, and then quietly, they shift into another chapter. Spring doesn't return in the middle of winter just because we miss the warmth, and people are no different. If your image still appears in their mind, it may simply mean you represented an important phase in their life, a time when they were searching for themselves, a season when they were learning how to love in a more mature way. You may have been the one who opened a new way of thinking for them, or the one who gently forced them to face truths they had never dared to confront. Milestones like that don't disappear just because two people no longer walk side by side. But that doesn't require you to return to complete something unfinished. Your value doesn't depend on whether the story continues. It rests in the fact that you were real during the part you shared. Some of the most beautiful connections are the ones preserved in memory, like a photograph that doesn't need editing, doesn't need rewriting, doesn't need extending. You don't have to go back to prove that you mattered. If someone was changed by your presence, that already speaks for itself. Waiting for a sign can sometimes cause the heart to delay its own movement, while life is still inviting you forward. Maybe the most beautiful part of that connection isn't the possibility of reunion. Maybe it's that it existed at exactly the right time. You met when both of you were still learning who you were. You walked together for a stretch of road, and then each of you turned in a different direction, carrying what you had learned. That doesn't make the story a failure. It simply shows that every relationship has its own purpose in the journey of growth. And sometimes, maturity means honoring what has passed without trying to pull it back. If they still think of you, it may just be their mind revisiting a lesson, an emotion, a version of themselves that once existed beside you. You don't have to control that. You don't have to decode it. You only need to ask yourself, what did I learn from that connection? How did I grow? Because in the end, what stays the longest isn't a specific person. It's the shift in how we see life. And if that relationship helped you understand your worth more deeply, helped you establish stronger boundaries, helped you love with greater awareness, then it fulfilled its role. An emotional thread may still exist, but you don't have to tie yourself to it. You can acknowledge that it's there and still choose to move forward. You can smile at an old chapter and continue writing a new one with confidence. Because what matters most isn't returning to where you once stood. It's understanding why you stood there in the first place. And once you understand that, you stop seeking validation from someone else. You begin seeking peace within yourself. Time doesn't just pass, it shapes you, it refines you. It asks you to face yourself in your quietest moments. The version of you back then may have loved more than you should have, may have tried to understand someone else more than you understood yourself, may have held on to hopes that were never fully clear. But the version of you now is different. You're beginning to understand that boundaries are not coldness. Boundaries are protection, and they are how you guard your energy. They are how you say enough to what exhausts your heart. You no longer give everything just to keep a connection alive. You no longer shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You've grown, not loudly, but steadily. And if they think of you now, they may not only remember who you were, they may remember the change your presence sparked within them. Maybe you were the one who led them to confront their own emotions, the one who asked questions they were never brave enough to ask themselves, the one who showed them a kind of love that wasn't built on control. Experiences like that aren't easily forgotten. But here's something even more important. You changed because of them too. Every connection leaves a trace, not to keep us trapped in the past, but to remind us of what we've learned. And maybe you learned that you deserve clarity, that you don't need to wait for anyone's validation, that freedom and love can exist side by side, that growth is what truly matters. If they think of you today, it may simply be a quiet acknowledgement that what you shared once carried meaning. Not to reopen an old door, but to understand why that door existed in the first place. Some encounters in life are like mirrors. We look at another person, and we see ourselves more clearly. Perhaps you were that mirror for them, and perhaps they were that mirror for you. Now, both of you have moved forward with new awareness, with clearer boundaries, with a heart that understands itself more deeply. And that doesn't diminish what once was. If anything, it makes the memory more mature. You are not the person you were yesterday, and they aren't either. So if a thought of each other still lingers, it may simply be life whispering. You passed through an important chapter, and you grew because of it. Not every transformation needs public recognition. Sometimes the most beautiful growth happens quietly within. And when you can look back at the past without longing, without resentment, that's often a sign you've stepped into a higher level of awareness. What remains now isn't about going back. It's about continuing to become the most honest version of yourself. There are names that no longer appear in your present life, yet every now and then they drift across your mind like an old breeze, not to pull you back, not to open a new chapter, just to remind you. There once was a chapter like that. Some people enter our lives not to stay forever. They arrive at the exact moment we are meant to learn something important. And when the lesson is complete, each person continues on their own path. That lingering feeling, then, is not always unfinished love. Sometimes it's unspoken gratitude. Gratitude that you once had the courage to open your heart. Gratitude that you were honest with your emotions. Gratitude that someone once saw you in a version that was deeply sincere. You may have been a lesson in freedom for them, a kind of freedom that isn't built on possession, a kind of love that respects individuality. You may have shown them that affection doesn't mean control, that two people can stand close and still keep their own identity. And sometimes what makes them remember you isn't what the two of you did together. It's how they felt when they were around you. Maybe they learned to open up more, to think more broadly, to accept that not every relationship is meant to be owned. If that memory returns to them from time to time, it may simply be a gentle reminder of what once moved their heart, not to reignite old emotions, but to recognize that they once experienced something meaningful. And the same may be true for you. When you look back, you might realize you were stronger than you thought, that you loved without losing yourself, that you learned how to let go without carrying bitterness. Lessons like that aren't loud, but they shape the way you walk forward. That lingering feeling, if it still exists, may just be a quiet space between two chapters, a pause to look back and smile. Not every emotion needs to be resolved through action. Some emotions simply need to be acknowledged. Acknowledged as something that was once beautiful, once real, something that once expanded your heart. And then, You leave it there, like a letter never sent, like a landscape you once passed through that still holds light in memory. When you begin to see it this way, the lingering feeling no longer confuses you. It becomes proof that you live deeply. And perhaps that is what truly matters most. After everything we've walked through in this journey, maybe what truly matters isn't about them. It's about you. Your worth is not measured by whether someone remembers your name on a quiet afternoon. It isn't confirmed by a message that comes back. It doesn't increase when someone feels regret. And it doesn't decrease when they move on. Your value has always existed. If someone still thinks of you, that can be beautiful in its own way. A quiet sign that you once touched their heart. And if they no longer think of you, that doesn't erase what you gave. What is real doesn't disappear just because it's no longer spoken. That emotional thread, if it still lingers, may simply be an echo, a soft resonance in memory. But you are living in the present. You are growing. Learning how to love more consciously. Building a version of yourself that is steadier, wiser, clearer. True healing rarely comes from restoring an old relationship. It comes when you realize you once loved fully and still have the courage to believe in love again. It comes when you understand that connection isn't meant to be possessed. It's meant to be experienced, to be learned from, to expand your heart. You don't have to go back to close the past. You close it by growing. You close it by forgiving them and yourself, by accepting that everyone was doing the best they knew how to do at the time. And then you move forward, not with coldness, but with understanding. You move forward not because you forgot, but because you understand enough. You understand that you deserve clarity. You deserve respect. You deserve a connection where you never have to question your own worth. If there is one thing I hope you carry with you after this video, it's a sense of calm. Calm when you think about what has passed. Calm when you look ahead. Somewhere out there, someone who once met you may still hold a gentle memory of you, but that memory no longer defines your happiness. Your happiness is built from the choices you make each day, from how you treat yourself, from how honest you are with your own emotions. You have loved, you have connected, and you have grown because of it. That is enough. And if your heart today is still open, not because of one specific person, but because you believe in your own journey, then maybe you've already stepped into a new chapter. Thank you for staying until the end. If these reflections touched you in your own way, keep what resonates and let the rest drift away. Your journey is still unfolding, and the next chapter always begins with the peace you cultivate within yourself.